My boy stood in the doorway with the porch light buzzing over his head and told me I had until the turkey was cold to get my things off his property. He figured he was tossing out a broke old man with a bad hip and $40 to his name, somebody who'd freeze on a bus bench before sunrise. He figured he was finally cutting loose the deadweight. What my son didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that the shivering old man on his welcome mat had $38 million sitting in liquid accounts, a penthouse 12 floors above the Mississippi with the heat already turned up, and enough leverage to erase his whole comfortable life with one phone call before the 11 o'clock news. I gripped the handle of my beat-up canvas bag, and I almost smiled, because he had just walked right into the last test I'd ever give him, and he'd failed it about as completely as a man can. Before I tell you how I let my own flesh and blood dig his own grave that week, do me a favor and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever been treated like a burden by people who had no idea what you were really worth, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this one's for you. The wind that night came off the lakes mean and dry, the kind of Minnesota cold that gets into your fillings. First real snow of the season had come early, before Thanksgiving even, and it was already piling against the curbs on Linden Court. I stood on the front step of a tidy gray colonial in a subdivision north of Minneapolis, a house I had quietly paid off back in September, though the two people inside thought they still owed the bank for another 19 years. I knocked the slush off my boots and pulled in a breath that burned all the way down. This was it. I'd been rehearsing the part for months. I'd practiced the little tremor in my hands. I'd practiced letting my shoulders cave in like a man who's given up. I needed them to look at me and see nothing left to take. I needed to find out who my son really was when he was certain the well had finally run dry. I rang the bell. Inside I could hear laughter and a football game on the TV and somebody's playlist. I could smell the bird and the sage and the brown sugar yams. It was the smell of every Thanksgiving my late wife Vivian ever made, and it just about cracked me in half standing out there in the cold. The laughing stopped when the chime went off. It took a long while for anyone to come. Finally, the storm door swung open, and there stood Whitney, my daughter-in-law, in a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than what they thought I made in a month. She didn't smile. Her eyes went straight to my hands, hunting for a casserole dish, a bottle of wine, anything. When all she saw was that worn duffel and 2 empty palms, her whole face curdled like she'd caught a bad smell. "You're late," she said. "We already sat down." She didn't step aside. She stood square in the doorway, holding all that warm air hostage. I let my teeth chatter a little louder than they needed to. "Bus was running behind in the snow," I said. "Can I come in, hon? It's brutal out here." She sighed, long and put upon, the breath fogging up between us. "Wipe your feet good. We just had the floors redone. And Garrett's already in one of his moods, so do us both a favor and don't ask him for anything tonight." I wiped my boots till my toes went numb, and I stepped into a house that was so warm it was almost hard to breathe. They'd done the place up like a magazine. Eucalyptus garlands on the banister. Those big amber candles. A table set with the good china Vivian used to keep in the hutch. There was no hello waiting for me. My son Garrett sat at the head of the table with the carving knife already in his hand. His face flushed from the wine I could see breathing on the counter. "Hey, Dad," he said, not bothering to set the knife down. "Grab a plate from the kitchen if you want some. We're about out of white meat, so you'll be working with dark." I went to the kitchen, my knees telling me about every winter I'd ever had. Behind me I could hear them lower their voices. "Did he bring the check?" Whitney hissed. "It's the 28th. He always brings it around the 28th. "Relax," Garrett muttered. "It's in his pocket. Let him eat first. We'll deal with it after." I came back with a little plate and sat at the far end, the corner seat we used to stick the kids at when they were small and couldn't behave. Across from me sat my grandson Micah, 9 years old. The only clean thing in that whole house. The second he saw me, his face just lit up like a porch in July. "Grandpa!" He half came up out of his chair. "Sit down, Micah," Whitney snapped. "Finish your green beans. You can bother Grandpa later." He sank back down, small and quiet, and I gave him a wink, and he gave me back this tiny secret grin. And I swear that grin was the only thing that kept me in that chair instead of walking out the door right then. I ate a few bites of dry turkey. The room had a tightness to it, the kind you can feel pressing on your ears. Garrett poured himself another glass and finally looked at me straight. "You're quiet, Dad," he said, leaning back. "Usually you're 3 complaints deep by now. The bus, your back, the weather. What's the deal? You get that holiday check from the store yet?" Whitney and I were talking about putting in a 3-season porch, and a little help from you would go a long way. There it was. I set my fork down. It clinked against Vivian's china and rang out in all that quiet. I looked at my son. I looked at the boy I'd raised. The boy I'd put through hockey camps in a private high school and 4 years at the U. The boy I'd carried on my own back through every hard year so he'd never feel one. "I'm not getting a check," I said soft. "I lost the job, Garrett." Whitney's head came up so fast I heard her neck pop. "What do you mean you lost the job? It's a greeter job. Who loses a greeter job?" "They cut hours," I said. "Stores closing the location. Whole crew's done by the 1st. I looked down at the table like I couldn't stand to meet their eyes. "I've got a little put away, but it's about gone. I was hoping maybe I could stay on a while longer, just till I figure something out." What came after that wasn't the silence of shock. It wasn't sympathy. It was the silence of a calculator catching an error. I watched my son's face, and I waited. I waited for him to say, "Dad, I'm so sorry." I waited for him to say, "Don't you worry, you've got us." I waited for the man Vivian, and I had raised to walk into that room. Instead, Garrett set his glass down hard enough to slosh. "Are you serious right now?" His voice climbed. "You lost your job the week of Thanksgiving. Dad, are you kidding me?" "Garrett, honey, keep it down," Whitney said, but there was panic riding under it now. She turned to me, and her eyes went to slits. "Russell, you've got Social Security. You've got that pension. You can't just have nothing. How are you supposed to cover your share of the bills, the room?" I said, letting the hurt show, "I thought maybe you could help me, just for a little while." "Help you?" Garrett slapped the table, and Micah jumped, dropping his fork. "Dan, look around you. You think any of this is free? We are stretched paper thin. We just put a deposit down on Scottsdale over spring break. We've got the lease on the Tahoe. Micah's got tuition. We are barely keeping our heads above water as it is, and now you want to climb on too." I wanted to laugh until I cried, barely keeping their heads above water. I had been quietly covering their mortgage, $2,900 a month, for the better part of a year. I'd run it through a little holding company I'd set up so it landed in their escrow looking like some clerical mercy from the bank. They never once questioned where the cushion came from. They just took the money they suddenly had and put it into a leased SUV and a closet full of clothes and a deck they didn't need. And now, the second the trickle from my fake greeter job threatened to dry up, they were drowning. "We can't carry you, Dad," Garrett said, and his voice dropped into something flat and cold I'd never heard from him before. "We're not a charity. We let you stay because you were chipping in. That was the arrangement. You stopped bringing money. You're just one more thing. Eating out of the fridge." Whitney dabbed her mouth with the napkin like the whole conversation was turning her stomach. "And honestly, Russell, it's not even about the money. It's the space. We were going to talk to you this weekend anyway. I want the guest room back. I'm starting a little design business, and I need a studio. A 68-year-old man coughing through the wall isn't the brand." I felt my chest turn to a slab of granite. "You were going to put me out anyway," I said, just above a whisper, "even if I'd kept the job." Garrett wouldn't look at me. He looked at the wall, the ceiling, the centerpiece, anywhere but at his own father. "It's not putting you out, Dad. It's a transition. You need to find something that fits where you're at in life. There's senior apartments, Section 8 maybe, or one of those shared homes, people your own age. Grandpa can have my room," Micah said. He stood straight up on the rung of his chair, his little face gone red. "He can have the top bunk. I don't care. Don't make Grandpa leave." "Micah, sit down," Whitney screeched. No, he was hollering now. You're being mean. It's almost Thanksgiving. You can't kick Grandpa out into the snow. Garrett pushed back from the table. He walked over and took my grandson by the arm and pulled him clean off the chair. That's enough. Go to your room. But Dad. Now. He hauled that boy out of the dining room while Micah twisted and cried, and I heard them go up the stairs. And I heard a door shut, and then I heard the lock turn. My son locked his own 9-year-old in his room for the crime of being kind to his grandfather. And I want to tell you, that sound, that little click of the bolt, that was the exact moment something in me that had been holding on by a thread finally let go. That was the moment the broke old greeter died on that porch, and the man I used to be opened his eyes. Garrett came back down, straightening his shirt, breathing hard. He looked at me, and there was nothing in his eyes. No love, just irritation and arithmetic. You need to go, Dad. Tonight, I said. Garrett, the buses stopped an hour ago. It's a foot of snow out there. Call a lift, Whitney said, picking at her nails. Oh. But I guess you can't really afford that now, can you? Better start walking. There's a shelter down by the river. Hurry, maybe they've still got a cot. I stood up slow. My legs felt like wet sandbags, but my spine had gone to iron. I looked at the half-carved bird. I looked at the candles. I looked at the two of them standing there. Two people who had taken everything anyone ever gave them and given nothing back in their whole lives. I'll go, I said, and my voice came out level. I didn't sound like a beaten man anymore, but they were so wrapped up in themselves they never caught the change. I picked my duffel up off the floor in the hall. I didn't look back at the table. Garrett followed me to the door, not to see me off, but to make sure I really left. He put his hand on the knob. Don't make this weird, Dad. You're a grown man. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's what you always told me, right? I looked at him one last time. I memorized it. The arrogance in his jaw. The whine on his breath. The dead calm in his face. I wanted to remember exactly what my boy looked like at the very top of his pride. Happy Thanksgiving, son, I said. He didn't answer. He pulled the door open, and the wind shoved a fistful of snow into the hallway, and I stepped out into it, and the door slammed at my back. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I stood on the step a second and let the snow hit my face. It was bitter cold, but I couldn't feel it anymore. There was a fire going in my gut that no Minnesota winter was going to touch. I dragged my bag down the unshoveled drive, past the neighbors' houses with their plastic turkeys and their string lights, and I kept walking until I turned the corner and the gray Colonial was gone behind me. I stopped under a streetlight, reached into the inside pocket of that thrift store coat, and pulled out a phone, not the cracked little flip phone I used in front of them. This one was a satellite line, titanium and dark glass, the kind of phone that doesn't ring through to voicemail. I pressed one button. It picked up on the first ring. Mr. Ainsworth. Calm, crisp, wide awake at 9 on a holiday night. Dalton Pierce. My attorney and my right hand for going on 30 years. It's done, Dalton, I said. The wind tore at the words. The experiment's over. A short pause. I'm sorry to hear it, sir. Was it bad? It was necessary, I said. Bring the car. I'm on the corner of Linden 83rd. I looked back once more toward the warm windows of a house I owned, and they didn't know it. And Dalton. Kill the mortgage subsidy tonight. Cancel the auto pay on the utilities. Freeze the cards. All of it. Right now. Understood. Not a flicker of judgment, just the soft clatter of them already typing. And the portfolio. I thought about that bolt sliding shut on my grandson. We'll talk on the drive, I said. Send the car. 2 minutes later, a black Lincoln Navigator came gliding down the street, quiet as a shark in dark water, and pulled up to the curb beside me. The driver, Curtis, who'd been with me 20 years, came around with the umbrella already up. Evening, Mr. Ainsworth, he said, and took that battered duffel off my hands like it was fine luggage. I climbed into the back, into warm leather and the smell of money, and the door shut behind me and sealed off the storm and the noise and the betrayal, all at once. As we pulled away, I started peeling off the costume. Because that's all it was. The frayed coat I'd bought at the Goodwill on Lake Street. The work boots I'd scuffed up myself with a wood rasp. The flannel that itched my neck. I stripped it all off and dropped it on the floor of the truck like something diseased. And from the compartment under the seat, I pulled a cashmere overcoat, soft as a warm hand, and when it touched my shoulders, the broke old greeter just evaporated. And what was left was the man who built Ainsworth Lumber and Supply out of one rented storefront in St. Paul into 41 stores across 5 states. I closed my eyes and I saw Vivian, the hospice room. The machines keeping that slow, terrible rhythm. She'd grabbed my wrist with a grip stronger than a dying woman should have had. "Russ," she whispered, "don't let the money rot him. Garrett's soft. You hand him everything and he'll never become anything. Promise me you'll make him earn being a man." I'd promised her, and the truth is, I'd waited 5 years to keep that promise because I kept hoping I wouldn't have to. When I sold the company, $38 million, all of it quiet, the national chain folding my stores into theirs. I didn't tell my son a word of it. I told him the business went under. Creditors, a bad expansion, the whole thing gone, me left living on Social Security and a thin little pension. I wanted to watch and see. I wanted to know if the boy I raised would put out a hand for his father when he believed the cupboard was bare. I moved in. I paid them rent. I didn't know. I covered their bills behind their backs. I gave them a whole year of chances to be decent for free. And what I got instead was a man counting the days until his old man was cheap enough to throw away. I picked the phone back up. "All right, Dalton, we're live. Walk me through it. Remind me exactly what my ungrateful son thinks he owns versus what's actually mine." He didn't need to look anything up. He'd had it memorized for years. The Colonial on Linden Court is held by Birchline Holdings. That's yours, sole member. They believe they're paying a mortgage. In fact, their payments run into an escrow account you control, and for the last 11 months, you've been topping those payments off yourself through the holding company. "Cut it," I said, and Lord help me. The words tasted good. "Tell the servicer to bill the full note at market rate starting at midnight. When the payment bounces, and it'll bounce, because he doesn't have the liquidity to cover the real number. I want the notice of default drawn up. Don't file it yet. Just have it loaded and ready to go." Done? The utilities? They think the gas and electric have some happy little billing glitch that keeps their numbers low. They called it good luck. I almost laughed. It was a subsidy, Dalton. Correct the glitch. Let them find out what it really costs to heat 4,000 square feet through a Minnesota December. And the credit line? This was the part that mattered. Garrett thinks he's got his own visa, a 15,000 limit on his own credit. He doesn't know it's an authorized line riding underneath my account. I've been paying it down to nothing every month for years to keep his score looking pretty. Cut him loose. Don't close it. That's too kind. Drop the limit to $200 and let him stand at the register at Whole Foods and watch it get declined. There was a small pause. "And the boy, sir?" "Micah." I shut my eyes. That bolt sliding shut. That little voice hollering, "Don't make Grandpa go." "You protect that asset with everything we've got," I said. "Micah's the only piece of this family worth saving. Move his education trust to revocable tonight. Make yourself the trustee. I want it ironclad. His school's paid through college no matter what happens to his parents, and his father can't touch a dime of it. Not for the SUV, not for Scottsdale, not for whatever hole he digs himself next. Garrett gets nothing of the boys. You wall him off. It'll be done." A pause. "I should tell you, he's already been poking around. Tried to pull information on your old pension account yesterday. He's hunting for money, sir. He's getting desperate." I looked out at the river coming up dark and wide on the left, the downtown towers stacking up gold against the sky on the right. "He's looking for a body to rob," I said. "Let him look. He's about to find out the body's got a shotgun across its lap." The navigator slid into the private garage under the residences, and the lights swallowed us whole. And I rode the elevator up to a penthouse with the heat already at 72 and a glass of good rye poured and waiting. And I stood at the window 12 floors over the river and watched the snow come down on a city I'd helped build. And I felt, for the first time in months, like I could breathe. The thing I want you to understand is that I didn't sleep much that night, and not because of any guilt over Garrett. I sat up because of the boy, because somewhere across the river, locked in his room, was a 9-year-old who'd stood on a chair and told the truth when every adult in that house had a price. I wasn't going to let his parents drag him down with them. It took 11 days. By the second day, the cards were dead, and Whitney's online order for Christmas had been flagged and reversed. By the fourth day, the gas company had been out to put a real meter reading on the house, and the bill that printed could have choked a horse. By the seventh, the mortgage had bounced, and the default notice was loaded in the chamber. Garrett left me 4 voicemails that week, and I want you to know I listened to every one. The first was confused. The second was angry. The third was him pretending nothing was wrong, asking real casual if I'd had any luck finding work. The fourth, he was crying. He said he didn't understand what was happening to them. He said it felt like the whole world had turned on him all at once. I didn't call back, not yet, because there was one place I knew he'd show his face, and I wanted to be standing there waiting when he did. Every November, my late wife's foundation throws a benefit downtown, the Vivian Ainsworth Fund, for families about to lose their homes, which is a thing she cared about right up until the end because we damn near lost ours once when Garrett was a baby. Half the business community in the Twin Cities turns out. It's catered, it's photographed, and that year, for the first time, they were streaming it live for the donors who couldn't make the drive in the snow. Garrett didn't know I had anything to do with that foundation. He thought it was just a charity that happened to carry his mother's name, a coincidence he'd never bothered to ask about. He showed up in a rented tuxedo, with Whitney on his arm, in a dress I'm fairly sure was bought on a card that had no business still working the room, shaking hands, trying to network his way out of the hole he didn't understand he was in. I watched him from a table near the stage where nobody had docked to look for the broke old man. And when the lights came down and they called the founder up to say a few words, my son turned toward the stage with his polite donor smile already on, and he watched his own father walk up to that microphone in a suit that cost more than his car. I'd be lying if I told you it felt good. The room went quiet in pieces, a ripple of recognition, and I watched my boy's face come apart in real time. The smile, the confusion, the dawning, the fear, all of it, right there in front of 500 people and a camera streaming to a few thousand more. I kept it short. I thanked them for Vivian, and then I told him about a man I knew, an old man who'd been put out into the snow on a holiday by the family he'd carried his whole life, and I watched Garrett grip the back of a chair to keep his feet under him. I told them the man had been paying that family's mortgage in secret for nearly a year. I told them the house was sold that very morning, to the city, for $1, to be torn down and turned into a neighborhood park with a community garden. A park that would carry the name of a woman who believed home was something nobody should ever lose. Vivian's name. Whitney started to cry, and it was not a pretty cry. It was the ugly, heaving kind, mascara coming down, the cry of a woman watching her whole standing dissolve in front of every person she'd ever tried to impress. And as for what they'd all been waiting on their whole lives, I said, the inheritance? I let the room go dead silent and lean in. There wasn't going to be one. Not a dollar, not a share, not a stick of furniture. Everything I had was already signed into a trust for my grandson, Micah, with one hard line written into it. If either of his parents ever tried to touch it, manage it, or get near it, the whole thing froze and gave itself away to the Red Cross. I'd legally quarantined my own son from his own boy's future because I'd watched him become the kind of man you have to protect a child from. For just a second, looking down at him, I saw the little kid I used to throw a ball with in the backyard. I saw the boy who cried when he wiped out on his bike. And it hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. Part of me wanted to come down off that stage and put my arms around him and tell him we'd fix it. But then I remembered the snow. I remembered the bolt sliding shut on a 9-year-old. And I stepped back from the mic and I walked off that stage and left it humming. And I didn't wait for whatever came next. The morning after, I didn't go to the house. I didn't need to. A man like Garrett, you put him in front of you and you just give him somebody to scream at and blame. So I sent the only thing he'd ever really respected, which was the law. 2 moving trucks and a county deputy and Dalton with a key and a clipboard, and 30 minutes to take what was personal and leave the rest. Whitney stood in the driveway in her good coat, asking where they were supposed to go, and Dalton told her, real polite, that it wasn't his concern and that she had 26 minutes left. I watched it on my phone from the back of the Navigator, parked a block off. I watched them drag suitcases out into the snow while the neighbors they'd spent years trying to impress peeked out from behind their blinds. I watched the deputy lock the door, and it made that same heavy sound the lock had made on Thanksgiving, that click. Except this time I wasn't the one standing out in the cold. Curtis pulled away slow. We drove right past them. Garrett was at the curb hammering at a phone that had been shut off an hour before, and I didn't look at him. And Whitney was sitting on a suitcase with her face in her hands, and I didn't look at her either. I looked straight ahead because we had somewhere to be. We drove to the boarding school north of the city, where Micah was waiting in the front office in his new uniform, his sneakers swinging a foot off the floor. When he saw me come through the door, he didn't ask about his mom and dad. He didn't ask about the house. He just slid off the chair and ran across that lobby and slammed into me and buried his whole face in my coat. "Grandpa," he said into a wall, "you came back." "I told you I would," I said. I got down on one knee, and never mind what it cost my hip. "Didn't I tell you I'd always look out for you? Are Mom and Dad coming?" "Not today, buddy." I brushed the hair off his forehead the way Vivian used to do for Garrett 100 years ago. "They've got some growing up to do. But you and me, we've got a plane to catch." We walked out to the car, and he held on to my hand the whole way, gripping it like he was scared I'd disappear if he let go. We drove to a private strip out past the suburbs where the jet was warming up on the apron, and when we boarded, the flight attendant offered him a hot chocolate, and he looked at it like it was something out of a movie. I watched the ground drop away under us, the snow-covered streets shrinking down to a gray and white quilt, then to nothing under the clouds. I looked down at the city where I built a life, lost the only woman I ever loved, and buried a son who was still walking around. And I want to tell you, sitting there, I felt this strange lightness in my chest, like a stone I'd been hauling for months had just been set down. I'd lain awake asking myself if I'd been too hard, if I'd been cruel. But then I'd look across the aisle at that boy, warm and safe, with a comic book and a mug of cocoa, and not a single worry in the world, and I had my answer. You can't save everybody. Sometimes you cut a line loose so the lifeboat doesn't go down with it. Garrett walked himself out into that storm a long time ago. All I finally did was quit standing between him and the weather he'd been making for himself his whole life. The jet banked south, toward Arizona, toward dry, warm air and a place where it doesn't snow, and I didn't look back. I wasn't the beaten old man on the porch anymore, and I wasn't the man with 41 stores either. I was just Grandpa, and for the first time in a long, long time, that was more than enough. So here's the only thing I know for sure, and I'll leave you with it. Love doesn't come with conditions, but help does. Don't ever let your kindness turn into somebody else's permission to use you. And don't you dare apologize for picking the pen back up and writing yourself a better ending. If you've ever had to make a hard call to protect your own peace, tell me about it down below. I read every last one of them. Stay warm out there, and remember, the strongest trees are the ones that grew up in the worst wind. I've thought a lot about that bolt sliding shut, the one on Micah's door, and I keep landing on the same hard truth. Nothing that happened to Garrett that week came out of nowhere. Every cold thing he did to me on that porch was a seed he'd been planting for years, and all I did was finally stop watering around it. He treated me like a line item because somewhere along the way, I taught him that love and money were the same drawer, and you could reach into it whenever you ran short. That's on me as much as him. A man reaps the field he plants, and I'd let my boy plant entitlement for 30 years and called it generosity. So if you're raising children or grandchildren or just trying to be a person worth knowing, let me tell you what I'd do different and what I'd do exactly the same. I would still cover the mortgage in secret. I would still give a year of quiet chances, but I'd be straight about the line in the sand. Because the kindest thing you can do for somebody is let them feel the real weight of their own choices before it's too late to fix them. I shielded Garrett from every cold wind his whole life, and all I did was raise a man who couldn't stand in one. The thing that saved me wasn't the 38 million. Money doesn't make you decent, and it doesn't make you smart, and it sure doesn't make you tough. What carried me through that storm was a set of muscles I'd spent a lifetime building. And you can build them too, no matter what's in your account. The first is a backbone for doing right even when nobody's clapping. I could have taken revenge for revenge's sake, but I chose to turn that house into a park with Vivian's name on it, because justice and spite are not the same animal, and you've got to know the difference in your gut. The second is the clear-eyed sense to read people for who they actually are, and not who you wish they'd be. I gave Garrett a real test, and I made myself look at the results instead of explaining them away, and that honesty hurt worse than the snow. The third is the plain stubbornness to do the hard thing once you know it's right. Walking off that stage and leaving my own son in the wreckage was the heaviest thing I've ever carried. But I carried it, because a boy named Micah was counting on me to. That little guy stood up on a chair when grown men sat on their hands. 9 years old, and he already had more spine than his father ever found. So that's where my hope is now. Not in being rich. In raising one kid who'll tell the truth in a cold room. Love your people, fierce and without conditions, but your help, your trust, your strength make folks earn those every time, because the day you hand them out for free is the day they stop meaning anything at all.